Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I'm Dylan Randazzo. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather today. Hasn't been a great day for me, but it is always a brighter day when we are talking about Oscars and Oscar predictions. So, excuse my maybe more calm tone of voice, but I am very excited to be giving you my updated Oscar predictions. Listen, Telluride just finished. TIFF is about to start tonight, so I figured this was like the perfect time to drop these predictions because so much has happened in just the past few weeks, but especially the past few months. I made the last predictions, I think before Khan had even happened. So even movies like Anora were not anywhere near my radar. So I think the fact that we're going to be talking about so many different films right now that I haven't talked about yet in terms of the Oscar race is going to be really exciting. Some films that have held on, some films that have really fallen off. Like Megalopolis was all over my predictions the last time I made these, but that's the fun of Oscar season is predicting things and seeing when you're right and wrong. I mean, there's always a fun kind of game-like quality to predicting the Oscars. It's not just about the merit and the people winning, and that's great and it's awesome, but really the Oscars are just a fun game for us movie fans to kind of track things throughout the year, build hype for certain things, and kind of blow our own minds when things go differently than planned, and when Oscar races, especially like this year, are so competitive. Because right now, I don't think there's a clear favorite in picture. I don't think there's a clear favorite in director. I don't think there's a clear favorite in actor and actress. I think this is a year where everything right now is still wide open. So things could change a little bit depending on how TIFF goes. New York Film Festival's coming up as well. I'm excited to go this year and see some films there that I'm excited about, including like Anora and The Brutalist and stuff like that. But it is going to be very fun to see in the next few months how this Oscar season continues to shape up. But here we go. Let's get into it with the best picture predictions. I have Sing Sing at number one once again. Now, the reason I have it at number one is because I'm still just confident it's going to get in. Does this mean it's going to win? Maybe not. I still think there is a shot. I think especially because we've seen films like Coda pick up a lot of steam, especially as a season goes on. Even Everything Everywhere All at Once, that always had the steam, I think even built more and more steam as the actors went up to accept awards, as we saw people like Ki Hoi Kwan get behind a microphone. I think the same could be true for Sing Sing, where if it wins SAG Ensemble and you see that whole cast up there, how could you not fall in love with that cast? How could you not just see them and be like, wow, I'm rooting for that cast. I want to give this film its due and its merits and its accolades. And I think that's kind of the trajectory Sing Sing might have. Now, it came out a few months ago, didn't get as big of a splash and buzz and hype as people expected, but I think A24 is gradually releasing it to try to build more gradual hype rather than try to put all its stock into one weekend in the risk of it failing. Because if it released it worldwide in one weekend and it didn't make a splash, there's a chance that we're not talking about Sing Sing in a few months' time. But because it's kind of trickling out its release, I think more and more people are catching on to Sing Sing in a much slower, more gradual manner. It's a very unconventional release strategy that I think is going to pay off at the end of the day. The thing is, a film is kind of vitalized when Oscar season comes around. Even a film that is not necessarily on everyone's radars at the front of everyone's minds. I mean, look at Past Lives last year. I know Past Lives is a little odd because it was such a huge contender and then it only ended up getting like 2 nominations, but it still got the nomination, even though people were like, Past Lives, it got overshadowed by Oppenheimer and Barbie. It's not going to happen. And I think the same is happening with Sing Sing. I think people are like, Sing Sing, not a lot of people talking about Sing Sing. You know, it's falling off. It came out too early. But I think come Oscar time, a lot of people are going to be surprised when it still gets a bunch of nominations. Though I think its winning chances are less than it was back when I first did these predictions in May, back when it was the far and above favorite. Now I think there's definitely a bunch of other contenders, including Anora, which is the Cannes winner for the Palme d'Or, a film that was not on my radar the last time we did these predictions, which is also so fun. The first American film in a long time to win the Palme d'Or, so it has a lot going for it. I think Sean Baker is someone who, despite only being like 3 or 4 films into his career, is still an overdue name at this point. People know him, people respect him. A lot of the directors in particular really shouting out his work. I think Mikey Madison is a big contender for Best Actress. I just think Anora has a lot going for it. And I think having won the Palme d'Or, having seen what has won the Palme d'Or the past few years, and especially having Neon backing it, I think Anora has a really good shot of at least getting a nomination, if not being a contender to win. And then at number 3, I have The Brutalist. Now, The Brutalist, the big question everyone's asking, is it going to come out? And I'm like, guys, I think because people think, there's no distributor, people just assume it's going to be pushed next year. But here's the thing. When a film has as much of a big splash as The Brutalist had the last week at the film festivals it was in, there is no way that they are not going to come out this year, because they would be giving up so much momentum right now. If they were to not release this year, they're taking all this bent up momentum and hype and just deflating it like a balloon. I think the reason it doesn't have a distributor yet is because so many distributors want to distribute it and they're giving money and money and money and it's a bidding war. And the question is really just which distributor are they going to decide to go with? And I think that's going to be the big question. I think a lot of people are looking at this no distributor thing as a big red flag. I think it's a green flag because it means that so many distributors are hungry to get it that they're really taking their time to figure out which direction they want to go in. But then once they get a distributor, they really have to hit the ground running because it is a little late to be starting a campaign, but it's been getting such great raves at film festivals. People are calling it the next Godfather and There'll Be Blood, just this long, like 3 to 4 hour epic. It's got an intermission. It's shot on 35 millimeter. It's being shown some places in 60 millimeter. It is going to be a huge film come the end of the year. And whether or not it wins, that's a bit of a question. It is a big, long epic, and how many of those do we see win nowadays? I mean, we saw one last year with Oppenheimer, so who's to say? I think Brutalist is a top contender to win the Oscar, at least to be nominated. Now, there is that asterisk. If it, for some reason, doesn't get distribution for some really weird, odd reason, and they push it to next year, then you know what? I might just predict it next year. But either way, I am going to put a lot of eggs in the Brutalist's basket, and it will be a pretty brutal mistake if for some reason they don't get a distributor by the time they need to for the Oscars push. But I do have Dune Part 2 at number 4. I think Dune Part 2 is held on pretty strong, especially with Joker getting mixed reviews out of Venice. I think Warner Brothers now sees, okay, Dune is our route. We got to go with Dune. We got to back Dune 100%. And I think Warner Brothers is putting a lot of their eggs in that Dune basket. And I think it's going to pay off because I think they're going to be able to put their attention there and get it the nominations that it might not have gotten the first time around, like Denis Villeneuve, for example, who we'll talk about in director. I think Dune, though, I think because it came out so far early in the year and because there is still that talk of like, is there going to be another one? Kind of like the Lord of the Rings thing. Well, there's another one coming, so we'll award that one. We won't award this one. I think that makes it a little lesser of a chance to win, but I still think it gets nominated nonetheless. I also put Emilia Perez. There's always an international nominee amongst the 10. I think this is going to be the front runner for Best International Feature, and it's got Netflix backing it. And whenever Netflix backs a film, even if it doesn't end up winning, because let's be honest, Netflix hasn't been able to get a win. It's been pretty grim on that front, but they've been able to get nominations, especially for international films like Roma, All Quiet on the Western Front. They know how to get their international films nominated and nominated in Best Picture. So I think Emilia Perez stands a really great chance. I've been hearing great things about it. I cannot wait to see that at New York Film Fest in just a few months. Conclave, another one that has been getting pretty wide appeal and wide renown and widespread praise. The problem is none of that praise seems to be quite at the lengths or the heights of Anora or Sing Sing or The Brutalist or even Dune 2, which makes me a little bit worried for its winning chances. But I still think it'll get nominated, especially in a year where there is no clear favorite. I think movies like Conclave are going to have an easier time getting in because it's got a lot of star power. It's the follow-up to All Quiet on the Western Front from Edward Berger, who, All Quiet on the Western Front got a lot of Oscars. So I think people have him on their minds. I think Conclave is still going to make it in, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily a top-tier contender to win. Same with Blitz. Blitz was something that I had really high on my list. I had it at number 2 the last time we ranked these things, and I still think Blitz is a pretty strong contender. It's going to be a big tech player. It's a war film. It's got great performances from what I've heard. It's Steve McQueen, who won Best Picture a little bit more than 10 years ago. The only problem with Blitz is that no one's really seen it yet. It hasn't been, premiered at any sort of big festival yet. It's going to have its American premiere at New York Film Festival in just a few weeks. So people will be seeing Blitz soon. It's just there is that risk that it might not be as good as everyone thought. So I'm putting it a little lower. And that's kind of where I fall with A Complete Unknown as well. I put A Complete Unknown at 10. The fact of the matter is, this trailer was such a surprise. No one knew it was going to happen at all. It was going to come out this year at all. And they dropped it and they said, it's coming out Christmas. It's a very quick turnaround. But I think this is good because Searchlight has always gotten a film in. And this year, Searchlight's options were kind of low. I mean, they had A Real Pain, which was getting good reviews, but didn't feel like a Best Picture nominee. And then they also have Night Bitch, which I just don't think kind of screams Oscars. I watched the trailer. It doesn't feel like an Oscar player necessarily. So I think A Complete Unknown releasing in December was their way of saying, this is probably our best chance at a nomination. And I think it's going to happen. But like Blitz, Complete Unknown is something that is quite literally a complete unknown. It could be a whole bunch of garbage. So I did put it at number 10 just to be safe. At number 8, though, I have Saturday Night. And this is all riding on a stat that I have been staying true with the past few years, which is whatever wins the audience award at TIFF always ends up getting a Best Picture nomination. A lot of people called me crazy last year when American Fiction won the Audience Award at TIFF, and then I predicted it for Best Picture, and people were like, dude, no one's talking about American Fiction. It just won TIFF. Like, it hasn't been talked about anywhere else. Why are you predicting it for all these things? I predicted it for actor, I predicted it for picture. People called me crazy, and then it got nominated for actor, for picture, for screenplay. It won Best Screenplay. So I think TIFF winning that Audience Award is big. Now, it hasn't won the Audience Award, and I think that's the biggest risk for Saturday night. But looking at all the films that are going to play at TIFF and that are going to be wholly competitive, I think Saturday night has the best chance of winning the TIFF Audience Award. It's a crowd pleaser from what I've heard. It's going to tap into a lot of nostalgia. It's got a lot of recognizable faces and names. So I think Saturday night, if it wins the TIFF award, is in our 10 for Best Picture. If it doesn't, I'll probably put it at like 11 or 12 because crowd pleasers can go one of two ways with the Academy. There's going to be the artsier members of the Academy who are like, it's just to appeal for nostalgia and cameos, and yeah, it's not to be taken seriously. But then you're going to have the side of the Academy that's like, wow, we had such a great time. We were so happy and emotionally moved watching the movie. We're so happy. So I think, you have two different types of Oscar voters, and if this side wins, then it's not going to get nominated. If this side wins, it is. But if it wins the TIFF Audience Award, it doesn't matter. It's in our 10. We have to lock it in if it wins TIFF. And then Nickel Boys, which I would have put higher based on the reviews because I've heard such good things, but reading the reviews and seeing the trailer, it just gives me such Tree of Life vibes. And here's the thing, Tree of Life made it into the 10 in 2011. So I still think Nickel Boys is going to make it in, but it is much artsier. It's much different. It's definitely not going to be your top 2 or top 3 contenders for Best Picture this year. It'll still get nominated, I think, because it is getting such high praise. And I've heard it's just such a beautiful adaptation of a great book already. But there runs that risk of fear of it being too artsy and a little too alienating. I thought the same thing would have been true for like Zone of Interest last year, but that was widely heralded and widely celebrated. It went on to win more than just international feature. It won the Sound Award as well. So I think there's still a chance Nickel Boys could make a splash. It's just I think this is one of the films that if it didn't make it in, I wouldn't be surprised, only because it feels very artsy, almost to a fault when it comes to Academy standards, which sucks because anything should be able to make it into Best Picture. But that's just the world we live in. Moving on to some of the ones that are outside the bubble of 10, Gladiator 2, a huge question mark. If this ends up being the return to form that it is promised to be, where Ridley Scott has said this is the best movie he's ever directed, if it is the best movie Ridley Scott's ever directed, it's getting into Best Picture. I mean, even though it's a sequel, look at Top Gun Maverick, look at Avatar The Way of Water. It doesn't matter how much time it's been. If it's a good ass sequel, it'll get in. The question is Ridley Scott just BSing us? Is this Napoleon? Is this House of Gucci? We don't know. Based on the trailers, I want to believe it's the best thing he's done in a while because the trailers are freaking epic. But who's to say? I don't really know. I still think there's a lot of chances for Gladiator 2 to pick up a lot of text, which could also help its case. But I think it would take something like Blitz getting some poor reception, or maybe a complete unknown kind of getting, so-so reception, or maybe Saturday Night doesn't win TIFF. I think if any of those things happen, then Gladiator 2 could slot right in there. But I'm not 100% sure yet, though it is a very close number 11 right there. At number 12, I do have A Real Pain, only because a complete unknown is still a bit of an unknown in the fact that if it's not good, I think Searchlight can back A Real Pain. The thing is, Searchlight always gets in. So if a complete unknown doesn't get in, I think it's going to be A Real Pain. I don't think it's going to be Night Bitch, so that's why I have A Real Pain there. Also because the supporting actor category has kind of taken a complete 180, and I think Kieran Culkin's chances actually are a lot better than they were. So I think if Kieran Culkin ends up being a real contender for supporting actor, I think that could even be a better case for A Real Pain. The Seed of the Sacred Fig is kind of a similar story where, if Amelia Perez wasn't in the race, I think Seed of the Sacred Fig is our international slot. That's not to say there can't be two. Last year there were two, Zone of Interest and Anatomy of a Fall, but this year I think it's only going to be one. I think it's going to be Amelia Perez, but if a second one slides in there, it's going to be Sacred Fig. Piano Lesson. This is another 50-50. Fences made it in, Ma Rainey didn't. The difference, Fences made it in a very competitive year. There were a lot of good movies in 2016, and Fences still made it in. Ma Rainey made it in 2020 when there weren't as many big prestige films. There were a lot of films delayed that didn't come out because of the pandemic, and Ma Rainey still missed. So there's a big question with these August Wilson adaptations. So I think Piano Lesson is one of those films where if it hits the same critical highs as Fences, I think it could get in. Even if it hits the heights of Ma Rainey, you're still looking at acting nominations. You're still looking at some text. So I think Piano Lesson is going to be an Oscar player. It's just whether or not it's a Best Picture contender, we'll have to see. Moving on, Joker. I have it at 15. I dropped it a bunch of spots. I had it at number 4 the last time we ranked. The fact of the matter is it's getting mixed to negative reviews. And I know it's just one festival and everyone's saying, Dylan, it's just a film festival. Wait till the majority sees it. But That's the same festival that praised Joker years ago and got the Joker bus kind of started. They were tooting that horn for Joker, whereas this film, they're not. And I think, it all starts with the festivals. As much as we want to, not believe that, there are some exceptions, but I think Joker, the fact that it's kind of, you know, coming out the gate with a faint, making a faint noise, not really making a big impact. I don't necessarily know how I feel about Joker's chances here. It could still surprise. It could still. Who's to say? If it ends up being the highest grossing film of the year and just becomes such a cultural phenomenon, who's to say? The Room Next Door, another one that out of the festivals has been getting praise, but has also been said to not necessarily be like an Oscar-y film. They're talking about the performances being great, but are saying that the film itself doesn't feel like it's going to compete in a lot of Oscars. Again, that's just hearing word of mouth from other critics and other pundits. I will have to wait until it makes its rounds at a few other festivals like New York Film Festival, which I'm hoping to see it in as well. So we'll have to see with The Room Next Door. I think it's one of those films that in a weaker year could have maybe made it in, but this is going to be a pretty strong year all across the board, so I don't necessarily know if it's going to make it in, but I think just we need a few more people to see it. Same with Queer. I think was one that as the weeks were going on, I was getting hyped about. I was like, yep, this is going to be it. This is going to be Luca Guadagnino's big player, especially with Challengers coming out early in the year and being such a success. I think people were expecting that Queer would kind of be the way of honoring him for both movies, but I've heard Queer is a little bit more alienating, a little bit more obscure, a little bit more abstract, a little less conventional, and I've heard it's not really an Oscar-y type film either, which has me worried because is he really going to miss out on a nomination for either film? And that's what kind of has me struggling, where he's had one of the greatest like years of a director where he's released these two big like critical acclaimed films, but it seems like Challengers is the one that's being liked a lot more, and Challengers, it just came out so early in the year, and it's not like a Dune Part 2 where you're going to be talking about it in a bunch of other tech categories. So I could see a world where we miss both Queer and Challengers in the race, but I could also see a world where it pivots from Queer to Challengers. Maybe there's a way that Challengers kind of rises up from the ashes. Not to say that its chances were dead, but I just never really thought it was going to be an Oscar player. But there is a chance now, especially if Queer is not as big an Oscar contender as we thought it would be, that Challengers might actually have a shot. But regardless, they're both still outside the top 10. Here, another one I don't know what to do with here. It's like Ridley Scott with Robert Zemeckis, where his movies, when he hits, he delivers like some of the most culturally important and impactful films of all time. Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And then when he misses, it's like the biggest dumpster fire you've ever seen with like Beowulf and the Christmas Carol adaptation and Welcome to Marwin and Pinocchio, the biggest piece of poo in the last few years. So I don't know what to do with Zemeckis. He's doing some weird de-aging stuff in this thing, but I think the central premise of like looking at this one house over a bunch of decades and centuries and watching it from like prehistoric times to modern times to future times, I think it's a really clever idea. It's just, is it too much of a gimmick? Our audience is going to connect to it. Is it going to get that big push it needs from the studio, from the marketing, from the festivals? I don't know. It's a big question mark. But if this ends up being his return to form, similarly to how Gladiator 2 might be Ridley Scott's return to form, then hey, who's to say it won't get nominated? And then at number 20, this is just a film that I want to champion, which is The Fire Inside. Ever since I heard about this film, I was super excited, super ready to, get behind this film. But it hasn't been talked about at all. It's barely been mentioned. There hasn't been a lot of chit chat about it. It hasn't been premiering at any festivals yet. I believe it's going to have a little bit of a premiere at TIFF, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd really like for The Fire Inside to get in, but I haven't heard much about it. But I think it is one of those premises, and just seeing the cast, it's, I believe, written by Barry Jenkins. It's like one of those things where I look at it and it looks like an Oscar contender, just no one's putting any sort of marketing behind it. But we have to move on to Best Director. Whew, and if you thought picture was wide open, director is even wider open, because I really don't think there's one solidified contender right now to win it right now. I think the most likely right now would be Sean Baker for Nora, just winning the Palme d'Or and being the director behind it, being a well-respected guy amongst his peers. But again, Sean Baker hasn't been a big, Oscar contender before. So who's to say he's going to get it here? All my nominees here haven't been nominated a ton by the Oscars. Steve McQueen's been nominated once. Denis Villeneuve, I believe, was nominated for Arrival. I actually don't know. I might have to fact check that. But again, it's a lot of newcomers in this slate, which is very exciting, but also has a little bit of apprehension because like last year we saw a lot of, big, familiar faces. The last few years with Scorsese, and then a few years ago with Spielberg, like these big veterans. Here, you don't have as many of those big veterans competing here, and you also sadly don't have a lot of women. There are just not a lot of women-directed films that are kind of rising above the line as some of those big contenders this year, which is sad to see. But I do think Sean Baker's the most likely of those. I think Brady Corbett, again, if The Brutalist comes out this year, which I'd be very upset and very shocked if it didn't, I think Brady Corbett is going to get in there too. It just has all the makings of like that epic Best Picture, type movie. That if he doesn't come along the ride for it, it's going to be a little weird. It just feels like a movie that the director would come along the ride for because it is so epic. Same with Blitz. I think if Blitz ends up getting a bunch of tech nominations, ends up getting that picture nomination, I think Steve McQueen could come along. I know a lot of people are dropping him from the predictions, but I think the biggest attribute of Blitz is going to be its technicals. It's going to be its vision. It's going to be its directing. I think people are, kind of dropping him from the predictions, which has been a little bit weird to me. I guess it's for the same reason I had Blitz lower in my Best Picture rankings, is because just no one's seen it. No one knows if it's going to be as good as people think. But I think Steve McQueen's really well respected. I think he's still got a good shot to make it in here, and it adds a little bit more diversity in the best director lineup. Having a director of color there. Speaking of diversity, there's always an international nominee as well. They love their international nominees, which is why I think Jacques Audiard could get in for Emilia Perez. I actually wouldn't be surprised if he ends up becoming a contender to win it as well, especially because Emilia Perez is going to get a crap ton of nominations. I'm telling you right now. So I would not be surprised either. And then I do have Denis at 5, and the only reason I have him at 5 is because he missed for the first film. And I think, the fact that Warner Brothers isn't going to be necessarily going as hard with Joker 2 as I thought they would have, and they're going to be putting a lot of their attention in Dune 2 is a good thing, because it means they can really put a lot of their attention toward Denis Villeneuve's Oscar campaign. But at the end of the day, it's a sequel, and Denis didn't get in for the first one. Who's to say if he's a really well-respected director amongst the director's branch? We haven't really seen it proven yet. And I think there's a fear that he could get snubbed again, especially because they know there might be a third movie, Dune Messiah, coming around the corner. Maybe they're thinking the Peter Jackson thing of like, we'll just award him later. That being said, I still have him in my 5. I think it would be very shocking if he didn't make it in, but I said that about the first time and he didn't make it in. So I have that little bit of PTSD back stored away in my brain and my heart where I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure. And then Edward Berger for Conclave is right outside at number 6. That's such a tricky one because All Quiet on the Western Front won so many Oscars, but he wasn't nominated for that one. This one doesn't look like as big of a technical juggernaut as All Quiet. Yet I'm predicting him to maybe get in here at number 6. I don't know. He's a weird case. I have to see the film to see how directory it is, and I have to see necessarily where it falls. If it starts to win Best Picture at some critics' places, maybe. But Conclave is just such a big question mark. I think it's one of those films I just need to see to really fully understand what its best chances are in different categories. And then at number 7, I have Greg Quidar for Sing Sing. I think this is a bit surprising considering I have Sing Sing as the best picture right now, but I think we've seen in past years that you don't necessarily need a directing nomination to be a best picture winner. We saw that with Coda. Sean Heder did not get nominated for best director. Now, it is rare. It is definitely rare, especially rare to win best picture without a nomination. But I do think Sing Sing is one of those movies that I could see getting in without the directing nomination, just because it's not as flashy with its directing. I think it's beautifully directed. I think it's fantastic, but I do think it's one of those films that you don't think about the direction first. You think about the performances, you think about the screenplay, you think about maybe the cinematography, and then of course you think of it as like a best picture contender. But I don't think necessarily a lot of people are leaving the film being like, oh, the direction. Even though I don't think that's necessarily what a lot of other people are thinking. So I still have him at my number 7. I think if one of these bigger contenders, like let's say Blitz isn't as good, let's say Denis does get snubbed again, I think Greg Quidar could get in. Same with Ramel Ross for Nickel Boys. He's just not an established director either, and that movie is going to be such a distinct vision that either you love it or hate it type deal. Same as Mohamed Rusulov for The Seed with Sacred Fig. If they include more international nominees, which this branch likes to do, they like to load up on a lot of international nominees. I think there's a good chance he could also be like the surprise director. Even if his film doesn't get nominated for picture, this could be like a Cold War scenario where he gets in, but the movie doesn't somehow, some way. And then I do have Luca Guadagnino. Despite Queer not necessarily feeling like a best picture film, he has just had such a good year between this and Challengers that it would feel weird if he wasn't part of the 5. But right now I'm not predicting him as part of the 5, which is weird to say. But I do think if he gets in, it might be for Queer just as a, hey, you had a great year. This is kind of for your career as a whole, rather than like, we loved your direction in Queer. Even though I've heard the direction is very good, I just heard it's not like your Oscar-y type film. It's a very unconventional film. So Director is wide open. I'd still love to see even a surprise come down the line where maybe we're like, oh, Ridley Scott. Maybe it's like a James Cameron thing where we're like, oh, Ridley Scott's getting some ground. Okay, maybe Ridley Scott will get nominated. There's so many different ways this can go, and I'd be surprised if I go for 5 for 5 here, just because I think there's still a lot more of this race to shape up. As we move on to Best Actress, this is another one where I think things have really shifted and started to change. Last time I had Lady Gaga on my 5, and it looks like she's going to supporting. And I think the same is true here with a lot of these nominees. There's a lot that could be supporting and some that could be lead. For example, like The Room Next Door, there's a question: is Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton, are they both lead? Are they both going to be supporting? Is one lead? Is one supporting? Which one is which? I think that makes it tricky. I think with Blitz, the big question is Saoirse Ronan lead? Is she supporting? And then what does that mean for her other film, The Outrun? I think there's a lot of interesting questions to be had with Best Actress. But at number 1, I'm putting Carla Sofia Gascon for Emilia Perez. I think this film won at Cannes for all 3 of its actresses. It got a Special Actress prize. I think Carla Sofia Gascon would be a notorious nominee. She'd be, I believe, the first ever transgender nominee, which would be really, really cool, or at least out transgender nominee at the time. There have been, actors who have transitioned since, like Elliot Page, but she would be the first out transgender nominee, which would be so cool. And I think that movie is going to get a lot of attention. It's going to be a Best Picture player. So I'm going to put her at number 1 right now. I just think it's right now the one that I think the Academy would be most excited to award, because they love awarding history. We saw it with Michelle Yeoh a few years ago. They love kind of being the ones to indoctrinate that history with the Academy. Mikey Madison, though, for Anora, I mean, that is going to be a big contender. I think there would be no world where Mikey Madison misses out for this film, unless for some reason when audiences see it, it gets scathing audience reviews and people are like, this movie sucks. It would have to be like Spencer, where the audiences are just so anti what the critics are with Anora. But I just feel like, just from the vibes I'm getting from Anora and the hype I've been hearing about Anora, it feels like something audiences are also going to like. So I have no reason to believe Mikey Madison wouldn't make it in. Then we have Angelina Jolie. I think she's safe for the nomination. I think a lot of people thought she was going to win. I had her at number 1 last time. I think it's less likely, only because looking at Pablo Larraín's track record, Natalie Portman for Jackie got nominated but didn't win. Same with Kristen Stewart for Spencer, got nominated but didn't win. I think the same could happen with Angelina Jolie, where she doesn't get nominated, or she does get nominated, but she doesn't win. But I do think her performance is something that, even though the movie is not getting necessarily praise across the board, she is getting so much praise across the board. It's one of those kind of career-defining, cultural-defining performances from what I've heard, though I can't put my stock in an actress in a Pablo Larraín film, especially when her film is not in Best Picture, like Emilia Perez or Anora, to put her at number 1 right now. Marianne Jean-Baptiste for Hard Truths. Bleecker Street always lets its films down with its campaigns, but I think Marianne Jean-Baptiste is well respected enough. I think Mike Lee is well respected enough. I think Hard Truths is going to have just some of the most tear-jerking, powerful moments. I mean, if you watch the trailer, you know it's going to be a tear-jerker, and they love their tear-jerking kind of performances where they can show those clip reels, even though they don't really show clips anymore at the Oscars. I would say in a year with a lot more performances, from Best Picture contenders, I think there's a chance she could miss. But look at all the Best Picture contenders. I mean, Sing Sing doesn't have any women in it. The Brutalist, Felicity Jones is supporting. Dune Part 2, I don't think it's going to get nominated for any acting. Conclave has a supporting actress performance. Blitz, we'll talk about Saoirse Ronan, not sure if that's supporting or lead. Saturday Night, they're all kind of supporting. Nickel Boy is supporting. So there really isn't a lot of lead actress contenders from Best Picture nominees. It's really just Carla for Emilia Perez and Mikey Madison for Anora. Otherwise, I think this is where you start to see these kind of like one-off nominations, like Angelina Jolie for Maria, or Hard Truths with Marianne Jean-Baptiste. So I do think she has a chance. She's not necessarily in my top 3, just because I think those top 3 are set in stone. I think she's kind of competing for that 4th or 5th slot with a few other people, including Saoirse Ronan, who's battling with herself. The only reason I put her at 5 is because I don't know which film she's going to get in. And the biggest fear is that if Saoirse Ronan goes supporting for Blitz, maybe they won't nominate her for The Outrun. Maybe they just nominate her for Blitz for supporting, and then she doesn't get nominated for The Outrun. Now, the danger is if she is lead for Blitz, and they don't nominate her for either because she splits votes, and that would be a travesty. But here's the thing. If Saoirse Ronan gets in for The Outrun, I think there's a chance she wins the award, because she's so overdue. She's someone the Academy loves, the Academy respects. I've heard the performance is amazing. The question is just going to be, does she get in for Blitz instead? Or if she's supporting for Blitz, would they double nominate her? Or would it split votes to where she doesn't get nominated for either? I think Saoirse Ronan is one of the big question marks of award season. I think the best case scenario would be Saoirse Ronan gets a supporting nominee for Blitz, a lead nominee for The Outrun, and wins for The Outrun. It would be a really cool career moment for her. I think her time is coming, and I think it might come this year, especially considering Lady Gaga moved down to supporting. I think the field is more wide open. The difference is Amelia Perez and Honora are going to be Best Picture contenders, whereas The Outrun is not. But I do think Saoirse Ronan herself doesn't need to be part of a Best Picture winning movie or nominated movie to still win an Oscar. It's kind of like Jessica Chastain for The Eyes of Tammy Faye. She didn't get a Best Picture nomination for that, but she still won the Oscar. I think that could happen if Saoirse Ronan wins for The Outrun. So if Blitz is supporting, then I think The Outrun is like my number 2 or 3. If Blitz ends up also being lead, then I think it's a question of just which performance gets in, if any. I have Julianne Moore outside of here for The Room Next Door. Again, I don't necessarily know if they're going to nominate her and Tilda Swinton or pick Tilda Swinton over her in supporting, or if they're just going to leave both of them off. I do think Pedro Almodovar does have a good track record with his actresses getting nominated, like Penelope Cruz a few years for Parallel Mothers a few years ago. So I think Julianne Moore has a shot, especially if Saoirse Ronan ends up kind of splitting votes with herself. But only time will tell. Demi Moore for The Substance. I've heard this is like a really great career resurgence for her. The only problem is it's horror, and horror just never gets in. But I am hoping that this is one of those films that is just a horror film disguised as a drama, to where the Academy can still be like, yeah, we're nominating it. But if Lupita Nyong'o didn't get in for Us, and Toni Collette didn't get in for Hereditary, and Essie Davis didn't get in for The Babadook, I mean, I think it's a little safe to say Demi Moore will not get in for The Substance, but she is still on the outside, on the cusp. And same with Ryan Destiny for The Fire Inside. Again, a movie that I feel like just needs to be talked about. People need to start bringing it up because I haven't heard anything about it. I think once people start seeing it, she'll start getting in the conversation, but it might just be a little too late. And then Amy Adams for Night Bitch. A lot of people have her as number 1 still, or at least in the top 5. I watched that trailer and I'm just not convinced it's an Oscar player. I would love to be wrong. And if you think I'm wrong, comment down below, be respectful about it. But I really just never, after watching the trailer, I never said, that is an Best Actress winning performance. Because here's the thing. Amy Adams, the next time she gets nominated will probably be her winning performance. I think she's at that point now where when her time comes, it'll come and she'll be nominated and she'll win. I just don't think Night Bitch is that performance. I just don't think it's weird, but not quite as refined as something like Poor Things, where a lot of people were saying the same thing about Emma Stone. It's too weird. It's too weird. I think Amy Adams, for this to be her like coronation to a Best Actress win, I think it's going to be a really meaty drama performance that does it, not this silly film about her turning into a dog, which sounds great. I'm excited for the film, but I just don't think it's going to be a Best Actress or Best Picture contender. So I kind of phased her out of my predictions, and the next time I do this, she might not even be in the 10 here. Best Actor, though, this is where it gets really, really, really interesting, because I said months ago Coleman Domingo is taking this in a landslide. And I still stand by the fact that I think he is the number 1 contender. But after these film festivals, I've been hearing great things about Ralph Fiennes. I've heard people saying this is his best performance ever in Conclave. I've heard the same about Adrian Brody. This is his best performance ever in The Brutalist. So I think now we have a bit of a 3-way race. I actually think this top 5 is pretty secure. I think this is the safest 5 of any of the acting competitive awards, just because Timothée Chalamet for A Complete Unknown, as long as he does a good job singing and capturing Bob Dylan, I don't see how the Academy wouldn't nominate that. I mean, that feels like such an Oscar-nominated performance type role for him. And then Daniel Craig for Queer. I think Queer is not getting as much praise as people expected it to, but his performance is still getting praised. And I think he is someone as well who is overdue, who people want to see get a nomination. I just look at all the other people on the list outside, and I just can't see a reason for any of them to get in over the 5 in here. I mean, Sebastian Stan for The Apprentice, it's really cool. He's playing Donald Trump. It's a really cool performance for an actor who's well respected, but I just saw the clip, and I'm not necessarily wanting an SNL level impersonation, but he doesn't really sound like Donald Trump. I feel like a lot of people are going to say like, I didn't really play the character the way I expected him to. I just think it's going to be a performance in an already controversial movie that I just feel like the Academy overall is just going to kind of ignore The Apprentice, even though it is coming out this year. I think Sebastian Stan has a shot, but after watching that clip, I just don't know if that's going to be on the Academy's radar, as much as it would be a cool statement to make for Sebastian Stan to win an award for playing Trump in a biopic that kind of shows the dark sides of him that somehow people haven't seen. But I don't know. I just don't think it's an Oscar nominated performance. Same with like Paul Mescal in Gladiator 2. People love Paul Mescal, but like is he going to get nominated for Gladiator 2? I'm just not convinced right now. Gabriel LaBelle for Saturday Night. Some people are saying he's going to go supporting because like the whole cast is supporting one another, but he is the lead of that film. He plays Lorne Michaels. But again, you're not going to nominate him for The Fablemans, but then you're going to nominate him as Lorne Michaels. It kind of feels like one of those things where if he didn't get nominated for playing young Spielberg and giving the best performance of that year, which yes, it was the best performance of that year. That performance is fantastic. I just don't know if they're going to go for a film performance in a comedy full of other performances. Like, how do you single out one when I've heard every single review is singling out a different actor? Like, why is Gabriel LaBelle going to be the one to stand above the rest, aside from being the main character of the film? But even then, I feel like, I don't think that's going to be a film that gets individual acting nominations. I feel like that's going to be more of like a SAG ensemble type deal. And then John David Washington for The Piano Lesson. Those August Wilson films have a good track record of getting lead acting nominations. You saw Chadwick and Viola get them for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. You saw Denzel and Viola get them for Fences. Here I am predicting someone in supporting for The Piano Lesson. So I think John David Washington could have a shot. I'm almost tempted to actually move him up to number 6 now, having talked about Sebastian Stan, Paul Mescal, and Gabriel LaBelle. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to move him to number 6 because I do think, if anything, at least those August Wilson films have had a good track record of getting nominations. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see John David Washington if, like, let's say Daniel Craig fell off a bit. I just switched my predictions. You've seen John David Washington at 6 the whole time, but I'm changing it in real time as I'm recording this. And then Joaquin at 10. It's not happening. It's not happening. He would have to give a better performance than he did in the first film, and everyone's saying his performance in the first film was better. Also, all the personal stuff going on with the Todd Haynes film. I don't want to get into that drama right now, but if you know, you know. I don't think Joaquin's getting nominated. I just don't think it's happening. If it gets any acting nominations, it's going to be Gaga or nothing. That is where I am firmly standing on Joker, though he is in the top 10 just because I think the field is a little shallower. I think it's really top heavy. I think Coleman, Ray Fiennes, and Adrian Brody are going to be 3 really competitive acting nominees. I think we're going to see one of them win BAFTA, one of them win SAG, one of them win Globe, maybe one win Critics' Choice. That's what makes it fun for Oscar night. But that's where I'm going for Best Actor. Moving on to Supporting Actress. This is where, again, I think Emilia Perez continues its tear. I think Zoe Saldana, the question of whether she'd be lead or supporting is still valid, but it seems like they're going to go supporting for Saldana and for Selena Gomez. And spoiler alert, I think they're both going to get in. I think they're both well respected enough. They've never been nominated, but Selena Gomez, especially coming back and doing that show with Martin Short and Steve Martin, and she's becoming more of a prestige name beyond just like the Disney Channel star. I also think Zoe Saldana, she's one of the highest grossing actresses of all time, being in the Avengers and Guardians movies, also being in Avatar and Star Trek. I think she's just waiting for a career moment, and this film apparently has great performances for the two of them. I think Daniel Deadwyler, especially after getting snubbed for Till a few years ago, people are going to want to make up for that wrong. And The Piano Lesson, I've heard she is the standout of that film, especially now knowing that Samuel L. Jackson isn't as big a part in that film as Daniel Deadwyler, and she's the real standout. It made me really excited to see, as someone who really thought Daniel Deadwyler should have been nominated and won for Till a few years ago, and she wasn't even nominated. That was crazy, but I think they're going to right their wrong here and give her that nomination, and I think she could even win, especially if the Emilia Perez girls split the votes there. I also think Felicity Jones for The Brutalist. If The Brutalist does come out this year and it does become this kind of widespread Oscar player across the board, I think it's picking up 3 acting nominations, one of them being Felicity Jones, who has already been nominated. She would be the only repeat nominee here. Oh, just kidding. Tilda Swinton's here. I did put her in for The Room Next Door. A big question mark because, again, I've heard The Room Next Door is not necessarily as big an Oscar player as people expected it could be. But Tilda Swinton is a very respected person amongst the Academy, and she's giving what I've heard is a very heartbreaking, very tragic performance. So I'm very comfortable with this 5. I do have Saoirse Ronan right outside because there is that possibility she goes supporting for Blitz. Though I do think right now her best chance is for lead for The Outrun. But if she ends up being a double nominee, that'd be really cool if she's in Blitz and The Outrun in lead and supporting. Aunjanue Ellis-Taylor for Nickel Boys, I think could also get in as well. That film, I just have to see to know exactly how much of a part she plays in it. Also because of this kind of single point of view that this film has, and being a little bit more artsy, a little bit more Tree of Life. Like, Tree of Life is not a film that I think anyone was expecting to get any acting nominations, but I have heard little bits and pieces of some stuff she does in the film that could be very Oscar worthy, so we'll have to wait on that one. Natasha Lyonne has been getting like the best like critical reception of any performance this year for His Three Daughters. It's just a film that Netflix just kind of doesn't want people to see, I guess, because they're not marketing it well at all. It comes out like this week on Netflix and no one's talking about it, so I'm a little worried for her chances here, though I do think she could be someone who gets like an Indie Spirit Award, maybe gets some like critics attention in some critics circles. I think she's someone who a lot of people are going to expect to see and then just kind of fizzle out as the year goes on, even though she's giving one of her career best performances. And then I have Isabella Rossellini for Conclave. This is someone who I thought was going to get nominated, but I've heard she only has like 1, 2 scenes in that movie that are really worth noting. She's a very small part of that movie. So I just think nowadays we don't tend to see those types of supporting performances as much. I mean, we did get Judd Hirsch for The Fablemans a few years ago, who was in one scene. So I think there is a possibility that we could see someone like Isabella Rossellini get her first nomination, but also to get her first nomination for a one scene wonder type performance just feels a little off for me. I'm wondering if they would kind of nominate her in a few years for an even bigger, more meatier performance. I don't know. And then Lady Gaga. Again, I'm just not really feeling like Joker's going to be as big a contender as people think, but if anything's going to get nominated from that film, it's probably going to be her for above the line categories. So I do have her in my 10. Moving on to supporting actor, though, this is the category that has taken the biggest whirlwind, the biggest 180, the biggest shock that I've seen. And that is because Samuel L. Jackson, who I was saying right from the get-go is going to win the Oscar. He's the #1 contender. He is going to win supporting actor. I've read all the reviews for The Piano Lesson out of the Telluride Film Festival, and it seems that it's not really a big performance. He's in it, and he's the top billed actor, but apparently a lot of other actors, including Ray Fisher and Daniel Deadwyler and John David Washington, all outshine him. So I dropped him, not just for my 5, but I dropped him for my 10, and I feel bad about it because I love Samuel L. Jackson. I was hoping this could be his year to win a competitive Oscar. He does have an honorary Oscar, but I wanted him to win a competitive Oscar. It's just not going to be this year. It's not going to happen, which also paves the way nicely for Clarence Macklin for Sing Sing. I don't necessarily think he's going to win, but I think he's the surest bet at a nomination right now. I think, this could be kind of like your Troy Kotzer in Coda or your Paul Raci in Sound of Metal, just like a really exciting performance from an actor who's not necessarily well known, who's like giving just a really heartfelt, really honest, grounded performance. I think especially if Sing Sing ends up winning Best Picture, I think it would make sense for him to come along for the ride, potentially with a win. I also put Guy Pearce. Again, The Brutalist is getting a lot of nominations. It's going to happen. I think Guy Pearce is great, and he has never been nominated for an Oscar before, so this would be a great time to award him. I think Denzel for Gladiator 2. I wasn't convinced with Paul Mescal. I'm a little bit more convinced from him. I mean, you just watch him in the trailer and you're like, he's getting an Oscar nomination for that. He's Denzel. He gets a nomination for everything, but especially that role. He's playing like this villainous, kind of more trickstery, kind of conniving guy in Gladiator 2. I mean, you tell me that's not going to get a nomination. Like, come on. I'd be shocked if it didn't. The only thing it would need would be like Gladiator 2 just completely bombing and completely fizzling out. But, we tend to see these supporting actor performances from big legends in blockbuster films. Like Angela Bassett made it in for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Is that even her top 5 greatest performances of her career? No, but it is a great performance in a blockbuster that didn't even perform as big as people hoped it would, but she's a legend. And I think the same could happen with Denzel. No matter how good or bad Gladiator 2 is, he could just be giving that good of a performance that it doesn't even matter. But I think that movie is going to be good, and I think he's going to be good in it. I also said this earlier, but Kieran Culkin for Real Pain. I think he has now kind of solidified himself as a contender here, because we've seen a lot of other contenders fall off. I think Samuel L. Jackson not being in the picture now for The Piano Lesson is huge for him because he now gets to kind of sneak in there. And another thing is the Conclave boys. A lot of people were saying Stanley Tucci and John Lithgow are going to be double nominated for Conclave, but I've heard a lot of people saying it's the Ralph Fiennes show. It's Ralph Fiennes, Ralph Fiennes, Ralph Fiennes. And I think that's why I put Stanley Tucci outside my 5. That's why I dropped John Lithgow out of my 10 altogether. I really think there's a good chance for Kieran Culkin to slide in. I think with a complete unknown coming out, I also think Edward Norton stands a good chance of getting in for that film, especially, they love that 1-2 punch with like Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, getting 2 acting nominations as well as a Best Picture nomination. It's a good package, as well as maybe some text. I really do think, Kieran Culkin, I was a little, not that optimistic of his chances, even just a few weeks ago, even a few months ago. But now that I'm hearing that the Conclave boys and Samuel L. Jackson are kind of taking more of a back seat, I think that allows for other people to kind of come in the race and come in strong. Speaking of strong, Jeremy Strong for The Apprentice. Again, I watched that clip and I'm just not convinced it's going to get any nominations at the Oscars. But if there is going to be a nomination to be had, I think it would come from Jeremy Strong. He's well respected in the industry and he's giving what seems to be a highlight performance. I also have Mark Adelstein. I hope that's how you pronounce his name for Enora, but it does also seem like Mikey Madison's going to be the big breakout of Enora. Are they going to award 2 big breakout performances? I'm not so sure. Also, he's kind of a lead, but also kind of supporting from what I've heard. So yeah, the jury's still out on that one. And then I do have Ray Fisher for The Piano Lesson. I think if it does get a supporting acting nomination, it's actually going to be from Ray Fisher. It's not going to be from Samuel L. Jackson, which is crazy. If you told me a week ago that Ray Fisher might get nominated for The Piano Lesson and Samuel L. Jackson wouldn't, I'd have called you crazy, but that's the type of festival hijinks that happens, right? And then number 10, Brian Tyree Henry for The Fire Inside. I read this synopsis. I read what this role was. He's like a trainer of a wrestler. And I was like, you know what? This is an Oscar role. This is a role written and acted to be an Oscar nominated thing. It's just no one's really seen it yet. So who's to say? Moving on to best original screenplay. We're already 45 minutes and I'm already exhausted. I'm sick, so my voice is not healing up well, but we're going to kind of plow through these a little bit faster. I think original screenplay is a little bit more set in stone. I think Anora, I think The Brutalist, I think Saturday Night, which is going to be very, very talky, very scripty, and Blitz, I think those all feel safe. My big wild card here is Challengers. I think this is one that not a lot of people are predicting, but I do think, considering how Queer is underperforming, I think that could give the Academy an incentive to say, you know what, maybe we'll nominate Challengers instead then, because they want to give that writer the script credit. He's the writer actually who's married to the director of Past Lives, and she got nominated, so I think it would be kind of cool if he gets nominated as well. And since Queer is not necessarily as big a contender as we thought, I think maybe they go pivot back to Challengers and give it a nomination, though I wouldn't be surprised if The Real Pain gets it, Seed of the Sacred Fig. After that, it kind of gets a little bit more slim pickings with Hard Truths, His Three Daughters, The Apprentice. Again, the screenplay categories tend to be where we see those like lone surprise nominations. That's why I have Challengers here, but it could end up being like Hard Truths, where Hard Truths get nominated for actress and screenplay and nothing else, or even His Three Daughters, where it doesn't even get Natasha Lyonne the nomination, but then somehow it appears as a screenplay nomination. Like, I think that is where we could see some of these random like one-time nominees pop up. Moving on to adapted screenplay, though, this one is even more clear cut, where we have Sing Sing, Conclave, Amelia Perez, Nickel Boys. Those all feel pretty safe. I think Dune Part 2, despite a lot of people not necessarily knowing if like a big blockbuster sequel would get into screenplay. The first film actually did get into screenplay, and I think this is a stronger screenplay than the first film, so I think it could still get in, though I would be on the lookout for The Piano Lesson. I think The Piano Lesson, August Wilson's adaptations have gotten into this award category for Fences, and I believe for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom as well, so I think there is a chance The Piano Lesson can squeak in there in the substitution for like Dune Part 2 or even Nickel Boys. I heard Nickel Boys is a really cool adaptation, but it's a cool adaptation visually more so than it is in terms of its script, though I do think just because adaptation is such a big focus of the Nickel Boys praise, I think adaptation, it would be weird if it didn't get nominated in Best Adapted Screenplay. So there you go. I also would consider Queer, even though I did say it's not as big a contender as it's going to be. I would consider The Room Next Door, even though, again, it's not as big a contender as I thought it would be. And then my big kind of like long shot prediction would be Hitman, even though I don't think it's going to happen. Richard Linklater, still a well-respected director. He still got in for Before Midnight, even though that film didn't get any other nominations. So I think there is a chance, but I'm not gonna hedge my bets there. Now we move on to Best Animated Feature, and this is another one where I think all year it has been, and it still is, a two-horse race with The Wild Robot and Inside Out 2. I think Memoir of a Snail had a really big Telluride festival showing, so I think Memoir of a Snail could be your sneaky third, but I just think because of the box office of Inside Out 2, because of the marketing and the festival presence of Wild Robot, I mean, very rarely does an animated film have such a big presence at a festival like The Wild Robot is going to have at TIFF. I can't wait to hear those reviews out of TIFF. It is giving me major WALL-E vibes, and if it does have that WALL-E sentimentality and sensibility and artistry and reaction and critical appeal, I think it's still going to be our top dog at the end of the day. But the jury is still out because we haven't heard any of those first reactions. If it comes out and people are like, it's cute, it's charming, then I'm putting Inside Out 2 as my number one. But for now, Wild Robot's going to stay there. I'm also putting Flow in there. Also been getting great buzz for one of your more like indie animated features. Then when we think about like all the kind of like IP sequel kind of franchise stuff, you know, you have Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim on the bubble, you got Transformers, Moana, Mufasa, but I'm going to put in Wallace and Gromit. I think that is just one of the more respected franchises amongst the Oscars. They love Wallace and Gromit. They gave it a lot of the shorts to Wallace and Gromit back when they were doing a lot of the Wallace and Gromit shorts and nominating those for Best Animated Short. I think Wallace and Gromit Curse of the Were-Rabbit, it won Best Picture, so I think they still love the Wallace and Gromit characters. I think they love that style of humor, that studio. So that is what I'm going to go with my fifth. A lot of people are predicting Piece by Piece. It's an animated Lego documentary about Pharrell Williams. The only problem is that no Lego movie has ever been nominated here. They just some reason don't love the Lego movies, and I'd be shocked if of all the Lego movies they go with this one over Lego Batman and the original Lego movie. The fact that the original Lego movie didn't get a nomination here makes me think they're never going to give a Lego movie this award. So I'm going to keep piece by piece out of there. Same with Lord of the Rings. Again, I don't know if they're necessarily going to embrace a Lord of the Rings anime movie. I think they might find it a little alienating, but it is Lord of the Rings, so maybe just that notoriety gets it into the race. I think Transformers 1, it feels like our TMNT Mutant Mayhem of the year, where it's getting really good reviews and really good buzz, but no one's taking it seriously the way no one took TMNT seriously. I think they just think it's for kids. I would be surprised if a lot of people don't even watch this one and don't nominate it. Moana 2, Disney sequels usually don't have a good track record, like Frozen 2, but Inside Out 2 is the opposite, where like Pixar sequels, if they're really good, do get in. So it is kind of a 50-50 with those. If Moana 2 is great, it could bump up that list. And then Mufasa. If Disney is willing to admit that it is a animated film, then it could get in. But I think Disney's going to try hard to be like, no, it's live action. And it's like, no, it's literally not. You're animating lions. There is no live action to this film whatsoever. But for that reason, I don't think it's going to happen. Even though Barry Jenkins is attached. He's the director, and he won Best Picture less than 10 years ago. So now for some of the tech categories, starting with cinematography, I think Dune Part 2 is the heavy favorite here. This is a category, though, where I do have Joker. I did say Joker is going to fall off in a lot of categories. I don't think cinematography is going to be one of them. I think the cinematography is the standout of that trailer. I love the shot where he's got like the makeup on the screen and then he kind of comes into the frame and it makes a smile on his face. Like that shit was like the stuff on the trailer. I was like, ooh, I'm getting giddy over this. So I think it can still pull that nomination. I also think The Brutalist, just the size of it, the scale of it, the scope of it. Same with Blitz. Nickel Boys. Nickel Boys is a little bit more contained than like The Brutalist and Blitz. Like those are big like almost blockbuster like epics. But Nickel Boys is a little bit more small and confined, but the very unique point of view of that film, from what I've heard, is going to be, I think, enough to get it into the race. Though I wouldn't be surprised if Conclave makes it in. Of course, All Quiet on the Western Front won this award a few years ago. Gladiator 2, again, if it looks great, as good as the trailer, there's a very good chance it gets in for cinematography as well. And then I also have some other films. I mean, Nosferatu is always one you got to keep your eye on. Roger Eggers, his other film, The Lighthouse, got into this category. Maria, again, looks beautiful. Pablo Larraín's last film, El Conde, got in here. I'm just kind of going off of previous trends. So that's why I have all those films there in the top 10. As for editing, I think Dune Part 2, this is one that it could get upset by for either The Brutalist or Nora or even Sing Sing. I think this is one where as much as a film could have a lot of editing, I think they also tend to look at just like the best picture overall and a lot of overlap, which is why I have a Nora, which is why I have Sing Sing, The Brutalist. It's basically my top 4 for picture. And then I also have Saturday Night, just because Saturday Night does feel like it's going to have that kind of manic energy that you look for in like an editing contender. I think it's going to have a lot of editing, and a lot of editing is always a good thing for the Academy to keep an eye on. But I do think Emilia Perez being a top 5 contender for Best Picture could also get in there. Complete Unknown, also a possibility. Conclave, Blitz. Again, it's these same movies that keep coming up and up. The one surprise here, though, would be Challengers. I'd really love to see Challengers get in. I think the editing is one of the strongest aspects of Challengers, and people have noted that. It's just a question of, is Challengers going to have that resurgence that we hope it can have at the end of the year? I really hope it does, but it's looking a little slim right now, but we'll have to see. As for production design, Dune Part 2 continuing this trend and this sweep. Again, I don't necessarily know if Dune Part 2 is going to win all of these, but I think it's the safest for a nomination. I also think Gladiator 2 is very safe for a nomination. I mean, you just look at the sets in that trailer. I mean, there's no way it's going to get snubbed for production design. This is where I also have Blitz. It's a big war film. War films tend to do very well here. Brutalist is an epic. I don't know much about its production design, but I've been hearing good things nonetheless. And then Joker. I do still have Joker in here. They're going to create a lot of big like musical sets. The set pieces are large and big. It probably has more sets than the first film, and the first film, I believe, got nominated for production design. So I still think this is one that Joker could get into. But if one of these is going to miss, if let's say Joker is just kind of left out altogether, I think you could see one of your more fantastical kind of genre films get in here, like Nosferatu. Maybe Beetlejuice gets in here. Maybe Wicked even. I think there's some cool sets going on in the trailer for Wicked, even though it also has some pretty poor green screen, so we'll have to see there. Saturday Night, they're going to be creating a lot of those old Saturday Night Live studios, and but it is a studio that is also up right now. Like you can actually go to the studio in Rock Center where they film it. So I don't know how much of that is going to be production design versus just like filming on location. So I don't necessarily know if Saturday Night's going to be a player there. Moving on to costume designs, though, this is where a lot of people have said, Dylan, you're too harsh on Wicked. You're too harsh on Wicked. I think Wicked's going to win this one. I think the costumes look great. I think Glinda's dress alone will get its nomination and its win. I do think if anything else is going to challenge it, though, I think Maria, just for all those really beautiful outfits that Angelina Jolie gets to wear in that thing. I think Gladiator 2, of course, those Roman outfits and all the armor and the sandals. I mean, there is a genre literally called sword and sandal. Half of that is costumes. So, I mean, sandals, costumes. There you go. I think Dune can still get in. I think this is one of the categories though Dune does not win. I just don't know why they would prioritize giving Dune another award here when they can spread the wealth and give it to something like Wicked or even something like if it gets in like Beetlejuice, like that'd be so fun. Or even Conclave. I mean, it's a bunch of nuns, so like maybe that'd be, or a bunch of popes, nuns. I don't know. But like I think it could be really cool to give the spread the wealth a little bit. But I do think this is one that Joker misses out on. I think the costumes are more or less the same as the first. I mean, obviously Harley's gonna have some cool costumes, but I don't think it's gonna be enough to get it in that top 5. As for makeup, this is the most fun category because this is where the Academy likes to just go off the rails. Because the makeup branch doesn't care what the most popular movies are. They don't care what's well renowned. They nominated Golda last year. Like they like to do their own thing. So for that reason, I have The Substance at number 1 because that movie, just from the posters and the trailers, the makeup in that thing looks so good. And I've heard every single person who's left that screening at the Cannes Film Festival said this is the best makeup they will see all year. So I'm going to take that with a bit of a grain of salt, but I'm also going to take that seriously. And I'm going to say The Substance ends up being a contender here. I think the question is it going to get in because it's horror? But I think this is the category that if you're going to get a horror film nominated in something, this is the category to do it. We've seen The Wolfman won in 2010. So like horror films do get nominated here. Beetlejuice. Of course, the first film won. This one is a sequel. I would be shocked if it doesn't get nominated here. Dune Part 2. Again, this is one where I think they spread the wealth, but Dune missing makeup would be shocking at this point. Amelia Perez, I've heard some cool things about the makeup of that film. If you don't know the premise of the film, I don't want to necessarily spoil it for you, but I think a lot of the disguise of the premise, it's hard to talk about without talking about the premise. But if you know the premise, you know that there's going to be some cool makeup stuff going on earlier in the film in regards to one character. So I think Amelia Perez could get in. And then A Different Man. This is one that I think is only going to be competing in makeup. I think Sebastian Stan has a really cool transformation in this film, almost like similar to like Elephant Man in the way the makeup is constructed there. So I think this is one where we could see some really cool nominations. If The Substance, Beetlejuice, and Different Man get in, that's just a lot of really cool nominations that you might not see those films get nominated anywhere else. Which would be really fun. I mean, that's why I have in this like runner-up list, you have Sasquatch Sunset. Like, what other world would Sasquatch Sunset get an Oscar nomination? That's why this category is so cool. That's why the Oscars are so cool. That's why they have these branches to allow films like that to have a shot. I think this is where you could see Furiosa finally get a shot at a nomination. Same with Night Bitch. I mean, this is where we could see a lot of kind of crazy things happen. But as always, I have to bring up Joker again, and I did leave it off here for makeup. I just think it's the same makeup as the first one. And the first one, I think it got nominated, but it's like, how much more can we do with Joker and his, white face with the red smile? Like, we've seen it all before. So I don't think it's going to get nominated. Moving on to visual effects, this is where I think Dune runs away with it. And sadly, as always, Planet of the Apes is going to be the bridesmaid yet again. It's always so sad, but those two have been my top 2 all year. I don't see that changing. I think Blitz, based on the war elements, is going to be up there. Gladiator 2, obviously, a lot of animal work in that film. And speaking of animals, I'm going to put Mufasa in there. The first one got nominated. I think this one's going to get nominated. This 5, I feel pretty solid with. I don't really see anything else right now being compelling enough to put above it. Twisters obviously has some great effects, but I just don't necessarily know if they're going to necessarily campaign it as hard as they should be. Furiosa just doesn't feel like it's going to get any nominations, and that's sad to say, but this one, a lot of people were saying the visuals weren't as good as the first one, so I think that doesn't necessarily help it here. I mean, who knows with here? Zemeckis is a cultural trailblazer, for better or for worse. If those de-aging effects work, maybe it'll work. I don't know. I don't know about here. I'm not very optimistic about it, but it would be cool to see a movie like here that is so different and very much not a blockbuster make it into visual effects. And then Godzilla and Kong, all those Godzilla movies. And when we saw a Godzilla movie win last year, they love nominating the big monster movies. And then Better Man, a movie I did not know about until I looked it up. And it is a movie about Robbie Williams, where Robbie Williams is played by a CGI monkey. Yep, I think I read that right. A CGI monkey playing Robbie Williams. I know nothing about this movie, but the second I read CGI monkey, I said, you know what? If that is the best CGI monkey anyone's ever seen, then who's to say it won't get nominated? Especially if it gets on the short list. Who's to say people won't watch it and be like, wow, that's so cool. That's so interesting. I don't know what to do with that. That's a weird concept, but hey, I'm putting it in my 10 because I don't want to be on the wrong side of history if it somehow does get a nomination. But moving on to sound, Dune, another one that I think is going to win pretty easily. It's kind of sad to say again. I like Dune a lot, but it's getting kind of boring to say Dune's going to win everything. And that's why I hope it gets a little bit more diversified. That's the word I'm looking for. Sorry, I've been talking for about an hour now. Diversified. But I think Dune, this is one that it's locked in to win right now, especially if it goes hand in hand with editing. But I do think Blitz and Gladiator 2, again, those three seem to be the big tech players. Dune, Blitz, Gladiator 2, they're going to be the ones picking up a lot of the techs. I do think Joker still ends up in here, especially because it's a musical. I think The Complete Unknown ends up here too, because you got to also kind of do the Bob Dylan mix, make it sound like, all those musical numbers most sounding authentic to the time period. So I think that's going to get in here. I think some of the bubble ones here, Amelia Perez and Wicked, are both musicals, which could bode well for them. I think Furiosa has great sound work if they're willing to acknowledge it. Twisters, same thing. Quiet Place Day One, The Quiet Place, the first movie made it in. So those are all contenders right now. I think sound is going to come down to what's on the short list, and when we get a better picture of what's going to get into editing as well. Best score. This one's really interesting because I've heard The Brutalist is a really, really good score. So I'm going to put that at number one. There may be a surprise here, and a bunch of people are going to say, dude, you don't have Dune Part 2 in score. But I was looking, and I looked at the Lord of the Rings movies, and the first film got nominated and won Best Score. The second film didn't get nominated at all for score. And then the third film got nominated and won for score. And I could see the same thing happening for Dune, where a lot of people are just like, well, he won for the first one. Maybe we spread the wealth. And I know that's like a long shot prediction, but I was so bored putting Dune at number one for every single category that I said, you know what? I'm going to predict at least one snub for Dune that people are going to be like, whoa, what? And I don't think it's going to be Denis this year. Last time it was Denis. I think this year it's going to be score. I think people are going to be like, yeah, Hans Zimmer's a lock. And I think the big shock is going to be that Hans Zimmer doesn't get in and people are like, completely surprised by it. I just think Dune Part 2, it's a really great score. It's an amazing score, but I think a lot of people are going to be thinking it's too similar to the first one, and they just want to spread the wealth. As for what they spread the wealth to, I think Conclave is supposed to be having a really great score. Amelia Perez is a musical, so a lot of that original score is probably going to be really great. Challengers is one of the most iconic scores of the year. Everyone loves it. Reznor and Ross, everyone's loving that score, and just kind of the weird kind of EDM style it brings to the movie, also underlying the sexual tension in that film. I also think with Queer, they love Reznor and Ross, so I think one of those films might get nominated. Challengers or Queer. The big one, though, to keep an eye on is Saturday Night, because apparently, John Batiste, from what I heard, if I remember correctly, kind of like created the score as they filmed it and kind of like improvised a lot of it. It's like kind of got a drum beat type of thing, like a Birdman style thing. I got to look it up a bit more, but I heard there's a lot of like improvisation going on in the score, and it does feel very much of the moment. It feels like the score is kind of molding itself in real time as this kind of drama unfolds. So I'm really excited to hear the score in that film, and I do think that could be a sneaky one that might end up winning. But The Brutalist, I've heard really good things about that score, so I'm going to put that at number one. And I am predicting that Dune snub, but anything can happen. But my voice is trailing off here, so I'm going to end it here with best song, where I think if a musical is in the top 10 here and it has an original song, I think it's a safe bet. That is why I'm putting My Camino or Mi Camino from Amelia Perez at number one. At number two, I don't think it's going to get an animated nomination because they never nominate the Lego movies, but they do nominate the Lego songs. Everything is Awesome got nominated, so I think Piece by Piece by Pharrell is going to get nominated. It's a musical documentary about a musician. We saw that happen with the John Batiste nomination last year for his American Symphony documentary. So I think it's likely that they like to award a musician doing a song for a movie about themselves, and that's what Pharrell is doing with Piece by Piece. So I think that's going to get in. I think Sing Sing, if it continues to be the best picture contender, it is. There's this really beautiful song Like a Bird that I think is gonna play really beautifully. I think it's gonna be used in a lot of the campaigning. And then we have Miss Diane Warren, who is in every single year, and every time I predict her, everyone goes, Dylan, come on, enough with the bit. And then she gets nominated. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna be crazy this year. I'm gonna get crazy. I am putting Diane Warren not once, but twice on this list. And you know why? Because she has a new film with Tyler Perry called The 6888, which she is writing a song for. So that is kind of your stereotypical Diane Warren song, where it's a movie that not many people have heard of, not many people know very much. It has a cast that people like, but is not necessarily getting a lot of buzz. I mean, it's a Tyler Perry movie that no one really knows is coming out, The 6888, but she wrote a song for it. She'll get nominated for it. But then we have Diane Warren's Relentless, which is a documentary about Diane Warren, where she wrote a song called Relentless for her documentary named Relentless after Diane Warren. So I think she's going to get nominated for 6888, and I also think she's going to get nominated for writing a song for her own documentary about her songwriting. So I think Diane Warren's going to get two, and she's still gonna lose this year, which is so funny. I feel bad for her. I don't mean to make her a laughing stock, but watching some of her reactions when she loses Oscars is some of the most entertaining Oscar clippage you could ever find. Just the fact that she gets so confident. Like when Billie Eilish won for that Barbie song, she looked like someone had murdered her family in front of her. Like she looked so surprised and just baffled by it. And it's one of the ongoing gags of the Academy where at this point it's kind of sad, but it also keeps it very entertaining because also who in the world would ever nominate the Six Triple Eight or Diane Warren Relentless anywhere else? And the question and the answer is no one, because those films are not on anyone's radar. But because she's writing a song on it, they're on the radar. It's like Flamin' Hot. In what world would Flamin' Hot get an Oscar nomination? Oh yeah, the world where Diane Warren's writing the song. So I think that's funny. Obviously, you can't ignore Lin-Manuel Miranda, so I have him at number 6 for Mufasa. I don't know what songs are going to be in Mufasa or Moana 2. I don't know if there's going to be an original song in Wicked or if they're going to use the original the songs from the original Broadway show. So if they write any new songs, I could see that getting in. Kiss the Sky from the Wild Robot is being used. I think a bit in the trailers. It's a really sweet song. And then just for my personal sake, I put Claw Machine for I Saw the TV Glow. If I were to pick a winner right now, it would be that one, but I know it's not going to get nominated. But it is like wishful thinking. If I put it on this list, maybe there's a way the Academy somehow sees this video and says, maybe we should listen to that song. So I'm hoping and praying that it gets some consideration. Even if it doesn't make a nomination but gets on the short list, if Claw Machine gets shortlisted, then it's a win for me. I would love to see that happen. But there we go. Woo! An hour and 5 minutes. That is my Oscar predictions. I am exhausted. That was a lot. My voice is hurting. I got to go lie back down because I'm not feeling well. But I wanted to get these out before TIFF starts tonight, Thursday night. So I'm hoping you enjoyed these Oscar predictions. Let me know down in the comments below what you think is going to get nominated right now. Who are the front runners headed into Oscar night, if we were to call it right now? And what movies do you think I don't have on my radar that are going to pop on the radar in the next coming months? And which films that I'm very confident in are you not so confident in? Are you not thinking that Conclave or Saturday Night or The Brutalists are going to be as big players as I think they're going to be? Let me know in the comments below because I'd love to hear what you think. And of course, always like and subscribe to this video or this podcast if you're listening on podcast. If you're watching on video, go check out the DYL Pickle Podcast and vice versa. If you're listening, go check us out on video. It helps us grow in both our audio and video forms. And stick around, subscribe so you can see all these videos in the next couple months. I'm going to be doing a few more of these Oscar predictions after every big kind of festival. So after TIFF and New York Film Festival, I'll do another round of Oscar predictions. And then once we get the first few precursors, like Globe nominations and certain critics groups and Critics' Choice, then I'll make another one. And then we'll do a few more. And then we will be at Oscar season. I mean, the Oscar season flies by way too fast, but we are still just getting started. So I'm very excited. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. And Diane Warren, I'm sorry.